This is House Planning Help, episode 140. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. My personal goal is still to create an energy-efficient home. Originally, I wanted to do this before I turned 40, which is now a matter of days away. Coming up in the next few sessions, we're going to be looking at specific people that you might have in your team. We've done this before. We've looked at builder, architect. This time, we're doing a little run of a few more different people that you might have involved. For example, today, it's a quantity surveyor. So what does that mean? Jerry Thomas from Smith Thomas Consult is going to explain what he does and answer all of my questions on that, just to give us an overview of when we might need his or any other quantity surveyor's services. Quick land search update. I think it was even in the last episode I was saying how I hadn't done one for a while because not much was going on. And then I started to get excited, and it's been one of those ones where you discover a few things about the land, and now I'm not really sure. It just feels a bit weird because you'll love this. I need to blame Henry VIII for this current plot and why it's not going. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? So let's think about the plot first of all. The land is about an acre, which is pretty good. Looking at everything else that I have seen, this is way, way more. Some of it is an orchard and you wouldn't really be able to do much with. That's fine. There's planning permission for a 2-storey house of around about 180 square metres if I want to do that. That's even beyond what I was hoping. The price is doable. There's no development potential because originally they tried to get planning permission to build 9 houses on there and that didn't work. So this is the last straw really. So it's open up to self-builders, the village setting, friendly people there, some amenities nearby. What is the but that's coming? You know it's there somewhere. Well, the downside, okay, there is not much in the way of south-facing glazing, which gets me concerned, but I've actually seen projects recently which are in a similar position and still manage to be very, very energy efficient. There's also a string of garages in front that are likely to be developed for social housing, but I think actually, seeing the plans that are in, that could be okay. So the but is that this is a leasehold piece of land and it expires in 40 years. I don't know whether you've ever gone down this route, perhaps if you have investment properties or things like that, but you wouldn't really touch an investment property leasehold unless it was at least 99 years. I think generally they say over 125 years. So this is where it starts getting a bit ridiculous because I have to credit my wife here. She's done all of the digging, but it's actually Henry VIII to blame here because we have to go way back to the dissolution of the monasteries. And Henry seized the assets of various people, often redistributed them or sold them off to favoured members of court. In this case, it was the Sheriff of Hertfordshire. And the Sheriff then later sold this land, but retained the freehold on, get this, a 500-year lease, which expires, yes, you've guessed it, in 40 years. And apparently all the property in this village works the same way, that it's all on leasehold, and in 40 years from now, someone could come up and demand various, I don't know what they would demand. And I know that you can get insurance for certain parts of this, but it's still not many people, for example, if they were going to buy our house at a future date, would be able to get a mortgage because that might be difficult. And I must admit, I get a little bit nervous around this too. So these are the pitfalls. We're getting it fully checked out. But what an incredible story. Isn't that crazy? We must be the only country in the world where our history of something that happened 500 years ago with a guy who, I mean, what was he hoping to pass this on to however many generations down the road that we are? So I thought you'd like that story. Let's get to our featured interview. It's all about the role of a quantity surveyor today. What is that role? Well, Jerry Thomas from Smith Thomas Consult is my guest and going to help me with some of these questions. First up, though, I asked him to tell me a little bit about his work.
Well, quantity surveying, which is the building accountancy or building economics side of the industry. A client will come to us. First principles say, I want to build a house. So we can do everything from an initial budget cost estimate and then working with that client through this, or work up the detail of estimates. We will work up tender packages if that's the route they want to go. We can help them with costings, viabilities, even to the extent of we've looked at funding options, helping with bank appraisals. Then moving through into the build process, we'll look at, as I say, the tender evaluation, working with the main contractor and the client to make sure there's the best fit, value engineering in some cases where the contractor's prices come in more than the client's budget. So we'll look at ways to save money without diminishing the scheme, and then working through the contract with variation administration, doing monthly valuations for the contractor. So make sure that he's paid regularly during the process. And then at the end, making sure the paperwork's in place, making sure the final account's agreed, and ultimately making sure that the client walks away happy with the financial side of the job.
That's a lot of things. We're going to break this down as we go through. Let's start with the training that you get for this. Do you train generally to begin with and then specify it, or how would it work?
I did a degree in quantity surveying, so we are literally into the disciplines of quantity surveying from day one. There are quantity surveyors out there who've come from a more general background, maybe from a building side, where it's a more hands-on, on-site approach, and then they will maybe specialise as they go through their career. And there are estimators, there are sort of quantity surveyors, there are financial modelling, etc. But my training was quantity surveying as a discipline, as a degree from day one.
If we're looking for a quantity surveyor, is there a specific qualification that we should be looking for?
Well, there's a Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, so you'd be looking for an MRICS, member of the Royal Institute Chartered Surveyors, either surveyor or practice, registered practice. So they're governed by the RICS and will have the qualifications, will have the administration from the RICS, will be overviewed by the RICS. There is a requirement on all qualified quantity surveyors to have a minimum of 20 hours CPD, continuing professional development, every year, for example, which makes sure that the surveyors maintain their professional standards.
When do you normally become involved in a project?
Too late. A lot, I say a lot, and on quite a few occasions we get pulled in and asked to provide advice too late.
When would you like to be involved?
From day one, when the client makes a decision that I want to build a house and I've got a sum of money, I've got a pot of money of X, and I want to build a house for that. That would be a really, really good starting point. Unfortunately, I see a lot of clients where they've approached architects, and like I say, I don't want to disparage or put black marks against the architectural profession, but I have seen a number of occasions where an individual has gone along with maybe ideas way in advance of their budget, and the architect has drawn up these ideas, drawn up these beautiful plans for either a new build or an extension that look amazing. And at that point, then they get the sanity check on cost. And it's like, oh, right, okay, well, I've seen that, something like that built on grand designs for that sort of money. But the reality is that their budgets are so way short of their aspirations that involving a quantity surveyor from day one, even if it's just say, right, well, okay, you need to be looking at a budget of X per square metre, £1,500 a square metre, for the type of property, £2,000 a square metre for the type of property that you're looking to build, to the specification you want to build it, that would give them a very, very early heads up. And right, okay, well, this is either the style, the specification, or the size that I'm looking at, and would prevent an awful lot of problems and heartache going back to the architect, diminishing designs, reducing specification, reducing aspirations, and the money that it comes with that, going back to the architect and going back to the designers to change those designs that have already gone too far down the line.
You've talked about two costs there, £1,500 to £2,000 a square metre is probably what I'm imagining for a passive house, is where I'm hoping to be somewhere in there. So we go to the architect and they start developing these plans. How far is it too far along? Because you need to do your job, so you need to know all the different bits. But
a good starting point would be a very simple sketch design that shows a floor plan and a typical elevation, and then, is it a flat roof? Is it a pitch roof? How much window? What's the level of fenestration? How many windows have we got in it? And a very simple idea of what the construction type is going to be. Is it going to be a timber frame solution? Is it going to be a masonry solution? What's the cladding material? Fairly simple first stage design considerations. And I think at that stage, we can give a client a reasonably good idea of what the outturn cost is likely to be. Obviously, with very early design stages, there's going to be a range of costs within that, but it's starting point. And from that, we can say, okay, well, just use the figure of £1,500 a square metre and say, well, okay, if you want to go for this particular type of window, or you want to go for this type of heating system, or there's a super duper roof covering, this will add or subtract from that base cost.
What is my dealing with you then? Is this a service that you provide to the architect, or am I coming to you directly saying, look, I'm chatting to this architect, here's the designs you've got?
We've done it either way. My preference would always be to work for the client, because if you work for an architect, there is always a danger that you're answerable to your paymaster. I mean, we professional quantity surveyors have a duty of care to effectively state things as they are, not pull any punches, not be beholden, actually just state facts. And if there's a problem, give answers to those problems. If there's a variation, give our estimate of the cost of that variation. So we've got to give the costs pretty much as they are. If you're working for an architect, there's always the danger that it can't possibly cost that much. Our design is based on this; it can't possibly cost that much. So you often get pressure to maybe understate figures to make it more palatable, or dress figures up in a certain way that looks attractive to the client. I'm not saying we do that, but I would always prefer to work directly for the client. So you're telling it how it is, and if the client has designed something that's way over budget, there's no secondary pressure there to sort of try and massage your figures to make it look a little bit better for the client.
Can we talk through a particular self-build project that you might have advised on? Would you always need a quantity surveyor for a self-build, or might there be reasons where you wouldn't need one?
I would always say, yes, you need one. I think it's the level of involvement. Our level of involvement has ranged literally from giving someone a £250 worth of 2-3 hours worth of time to look and give a very high level order of magnitude cost, just to give them the sanity check that what they're proposing, what the architect has proposed, is of the right order. And then they've gone off, and either between themselves and the architect gone off and secured a tender from a local builder, and everything's been fine. I suppose the advice I'd give is depend on the size of the project. If you're doing a £20,000 extension or a £50,000 extension, really I think that initial level of quick sanity check, if you want it, is a good idea. If you're planning on building a £4 million house, clearly I would recommend that you have a full suite of services ranging, as I touched on earlier, right the way from initial budget advice right the way through to bayoneting the wounded at the end in the final account stage.
So would it work to talk through this example? So you mentioned a situation of high level, but let's say it's a project that's going to go forwards, I don't know, 500,000, £1 million. What are you actually doing?
Okay, well, what we would do, we would start, as I say, we would take, if there have been some plans prepared, we would take those initial sketch scheme designs and as I say, given a preliminary order of magnitude cost. So,
how are you getting those numbers? Why could I not do this?
We're basing it on experience. Within the RICS, we have a database of costs. It's a nationwide database of costs, the Building Cost Information Service, which is the BCIS, which is administered and compiled by the RICS, which we have access to as quantity surveyors. Costs us a bit of money to have that access, but
and that's listing every product out there?
No, it's not so much every product. The BCIS is more a case of a building type by building type average costs, and it also provides, the service provides inflation indices, build cost indices, tender price indices. So we can use that as a high level, going to our initial cost estimate. That's a high level check for us. We also have in-house projects where we've got cost data from that we use to benchmark projects, look at the information that's been provided at an early stage and say, okay, well, in conjunction with discussions with the architects and with the client, we want gold taps, we want zinc windows, zinc roofs and limestone floors. And okay, well, we've got a similar project that had a very high level of specification with gold-plated taps. That came in at £2,500 a square metre, so we can apply those rates. Similarly, very simple design, no frills, no frippery. Okay, well, we can bring that in at, compared to a similar project we've had, and that's backed up by the BCIS figures at maybe, I don't know, £1,300 a square metre. So, yeah, we have that service. And also there are cost books, cost data books, again, which have everything from the cost of square metre for brickwork, for stonework, for timber, for wall plates, for you name it, anything, any major component that's needed in a building, we have got annual cost rates for. And then you're relying on our experience. This year, for example, one of the most reliable cost data books was indicating that steelwork per tonne was, I think, coming in at something like £1,800 a tonne. Current market rates and current tender rates are indicating that steelwork is coming in now at about £2,500 a tonne. So you can imagine on a sizable building, maybe not so applicable for self-built housing, but as an indication, you'll be relying on the quantity surveyor's expertise in keeping an eye on market trends, keeping an eye on building press. And someone just looking at the cold hard facts in a book would get that hugely wrong, and with a huge cost penalty.
Because you can get cost calculators sometimes as an online service. Now, you've rolled your eyes there.
I suppose they have a value on small projects, but there's a huge danger there that you miss out on so many factors that go to build up a construction cost. I mean, we're not looking purely, it's very easy to look purely at the building, but you look at drainage. Where are the drainage connections to? How are you connecting into foul drainage system? Are you going to the road? If so, how far away is the road? How far is the main drainage connection? Are you having to put a septic tank in? Are you relying on soakaways for stormwater drainage? Are you able to connect into the local stormwater system? Where are your services coming from? Electric, gas, water, where are they coming from? BT. And there's this massive peripheral costs that sometimes, I have to confess, I haven't gone into much detail. I think a number of the builders merchants offer these cost data or cost build-up services. And I'm not saying they're hugely wrong or hugely right, but there is a danger that they don't capture everything that's needed to build up a full project cost. And also they may not have up-to-date cost data where, going back to the steelwork example, where the market cost may have fluctuated wildly in a 6-month period or a 12-month period, and you could be out by a factor of 50 on a very expensive element of the build.
How often are some of the estimates that you put together either spot on, under, over? Is it a game that gets easier and easier the longer you're in it?
That's a nasty question. That's a very nasty question. I like to think generally it gets easier, but what's happened particularly in the last 2.5 years is that as we've come out of recession, there's a massive skills shortage. A lot of subcontractors and contractors have had 3, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years of operating at very, very low margins and possibly even losses. And as the economy has picked up and as the volume of work has picked up, it's been a bit like the top coming off a champagne bottle, and tender prices have ranged massive increases in certain sectors in tender prices. And I've actually had tender returns with ranges of nearly 100%. Which is very scary, has resulted in value engineering. For example, we've had tender prices increasing up to 15% per annum, and trying to spot those. And again, you have subcontractors and main contractors and smaller contractors who have got a full order book, but they'll put tenders in at vastly inflated prices. That if they get the work, well, okay, that's a nice problem to have, because I'm going to make a lot of money out of it because I've increased my tender price by 25%, because I don't really need the work. And then you've got others who are still scratching around for work and are still very keen to get work, who are pricing very competitively. So again, you're getting these huge tender spreads. Now, on the whole, we've managed to get these back to where the budget was and where our cost plans were. But it's making life a lot more difficult.
That's so interesting, isn't it, this range of prices? Because am I right in saying that construction on the whole has tended to go for the lowest price a lot of the time, or near to low, or is that just a huge generalisation?
No, on the whole, I would say you're probably right there, that it is budget driven. A lot of work is budget driven. And what we do as quantity surveyors is is obviously rigorously test the tenders when they come back in, and the skill is to make sure there's a set of documentation that allows you to check those tenders when they do come back in, so you are comparing apples with apples when you get a tender back. And with the right documents, you can see where maybe the building services has got a range of 60%, or maybe where the substructure's got a range of 40%. And you can see whether there's a consistent approach to pricing, whether someone is consistently high in their tender return, in which case you might want to discount them, or where someone has been dropping way below where we'd expect to see it. And on that area, we can see whether or not indeed the lowest tenderer is representing value for money, has been priced correctly, or indeed is a price that has been submitted purely just to get a foot in the door, and it might not therefore be the best price for the client, because that contractor then may be looking to recoup cost through variations. Oh, I didn't price that, or that's not included. So, either with a schedule of works or a bill of quantities, we can actually do that analysis at tender stage, which prevents problems maybe post-contract when the works are on site with a contractor who's trying to recover a bad position.
So in some ways, you're almost helping assess what's a good route to go down, and even with tender.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a number of routes that you can take in procuring work. You can go down what's termed a traditional drawings, bill of quantities, specification route, in which case it's very clear and very set out, or you can go down a design and build route where you issue a contractor with a scope of a set of drawings and almost a performance requirement for the specification. We want the building to look like this. We need it to be this footprint, but come back with a proposal. Now, I think probably where we're going here with the sort of the self-build or the smaller domestic side, I would always advocate going down a fully designed route rather than leaving the contractor to advise or assist in developing the specification. But even with that, you can just issue the drawings and a specification and ask for prices back. But going back to the previous question, what you don't get then is the transparency of price. You don't get the ability to look through the contractor's price and say, okay, well, that's value for money, or that's not value for money. And similarly, going into, again, the post-contract, the on-site period, without that detailed breakdown of cost, if there is a variation, I don't know, let's use an example. There's you wanted to add a new window in. If you've got a bill of quantities or a schedule of works with windows 1 metre by 1.2 metres costs £500, you know that it's £500. You're not then at the mercy of the contractor to come back and say, new window, well, that's going to cost you £1,000, Gov.
Can we take a typical day of what you actually do? So maybe when you're sitting in the office, what tasks are getting done today?
Today, right, okay. Today I prepared an agenda for a pre-start meeting where we'll pull together the main contractor, the key subcontractors and the designers next week, sit them down around a table about 3-4 weeks in advance of the work starting on site to make sure that the design has been fully analysed, that the key subcontractors know what they're doing on site. So as I say, getting an agenda ready for that. And that sort of just irons out any problems before we start on site. Doing a high-level cost plan for a development in Bristol, where there'd be 140 housing starts. And again, it's early cost advice to allow the client to make strategic decisions. Just done a bank monitoring report or concluded a bank monitoring report where a client has borrowed money from a bank to complete the project. And what we do every month is prepare basically a statement of spend progress, where the planning conditions have been discharged, what the cash flow forecast for the project is looking like, what the variation status on the project is, and just giving the bank the comfort on the monthly basis that what the contractor is asking for, or the client is asking for to pay his contractor, is in line with what's actually happened on site, and a general status update on the site. As another couple of projects where we're acting as employer's agent, where we not only do the quantity surveying and the financial side of things, we almost act as a go-between between the design team, the employer, and site and the contractor, where it's almost a sort of a project management light service, where we will chair the design team meetings, chair key meetings with the contractor and the subcontractor. And today's task is to prepare the minutes from one of those meetings that had a few days ago.
We've talked a lot about planning up front, getting all the numbers right. Do people come to you midway through projects or towards the end, or times when things are not going right?
Yes, I have had a few of those, and they're not pleasant experiences. Again, not on a self-build house, but this was on a commercial venture where a client had gone with bank money, which makes the situation even worse, had gone to a friend of the family who was a contractor, and they'd made an arrangement with the contractor where the contractor was effectively being paid on a cost-plus basis. So on a what was an infrequent basis, he would put a bill in for materials, time that he'd spent, and then add his cost-plus of 10% on top of those charges. And the client was readily paying him, the bank were readily paying the client, and all of a sudden the contractor disappeared. We got brought in by the bank to look at, or the funding bank, to look at the situation, and found basically the contractor had been paid circa 70% of the contract value, had done 30% of the contract works, and not only had he done it to that particular client, friend of the family, but also a very similar friend and a similar development not a million miles away, and similar sort of percentages, and walked away with the money and was found abroad sitting on a yacht. Very extreme example, but again, I suppose just errs towards caution in terms of setting up a scheme and paying for money without professional advice, particularly if you're talking about larger numbers. Go back to, again, earlier in our conversation, where maybe 30, 40, 50,000, either a refurbishment or an extension. Get some high-level cost advice to make sure that you're in the right ballpark, that you're not paying over the odds for it, or simply not paying under the odds for something which might come back and have a contractor who's trying to recover costs. But certainly on larger spend projects, get professional advice, get professional support from early days, and it can be tailored to suit, as I say, from sanity checks on budgets through to estimates, through to tender documentation, through to preparing contracts. And that's another subject actually I'd like to touch on, is make sure if you've got, even if it's a form of letter saying what the sum is that you're paying for the works, what that sum is based upon in terms of drawing A, drawing B and drawing C from the architect, specification Z. It's based on a start date of and a finish date of, so you have a program, even if it's just those two start and finish dates, and even if those requirements are just in a letter between you and the contractor before you start, it forms the basis of a very simple rudimentary contract. I would always recommend, there are the JCT, the Joint Contract Tribunal, have a suite of contracts ranging from a very simple home builder contract right the way through to a full-blown JCT contract, which you could use on large commercial projects. But always have a contract, no matter how simple and how rudimentary it is. And wherever possible, do not pay for money upfront to a contractor.
Well, we're just about at the end now, so I don't know whether you have any final thoughts. Maybe nothing to do with quantity surveying. It might be just for self-builders on their projects. But what are you thinking?
Planning and more planning. Get everything sorted. Get all the designs finalised how you want them. Get costs sorted. Get it tendered or agreed or negotiated with the contractor before you start. Arrange your incoming services before you start. Just be very happy that you have got a full, considered, joined up package of information, cost, program, and contract before you start on site. So many of the problems I see are where information has not been considered, where variations occur after the event, once the contractor has started on site, whether it be ground conditions that should have been spotted and should have been identified beforehand, whether it's the electricity board saying, well, you should have spoken to us 6 months ago, we might have been able to get your electricity supply on site when you wanted it for when the building is finished, whether it be a contractor screaming for variations because the design isn't complete or hasn't been considered on a particular element of the build preparation. Defer your project 6 months. if necessary, but get that information sorted before you start.
Very good point to end on. Jerry, thank you.
Thank you.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session, houseplanninghelp.com/140. There we've got all the main points. If you have a comment or you'd like to ask a question, you can do that at the bottom of the show notes. We got links to Smith Thomas Consult, all at houseplanninghelp.com/140. Let's finish up on a hub update and what we've got in there at the moment. This is our private members area. More progress at Long Barrow. This is the self-build project that Alex Baines is doing, and finally the roof is going on. So I returned to site, have a chat with Alex. We have a walk around the building, look at some things that have actually changed in terms of there was one window that they had to increase height-wise, which wouldn't have been possible if they'd ordered the windows, but actually with the ICF they were just able to almost take out a layer of the ICF to have this slightly higher window where it just didn't look quite right, and some other things that we find out on our walk around. Also, we have our latest module on building your team. So who exactly do you need to hire? It's almost in sync with what we're doing at the moment, looking at some of these roles. Everyone always says they want to be in at the beginning of the project. So how is that even possible? We look at the different individual roles and how you might bring a team together. And then there's our private forum, allowing you to interact with fellow self-builders, all building houses of some description. Perhaps they're behind you in the process, perhaps they're ahead. So get their support, even if it's just a shoulder to cry on. But I think to do this, you have to build up some knowledge. So it's interesting that we've all got knowledge in different areas. We got the quarterly progress calls, and all this we're tying in for the price of £99 per year. If you want more details, head to houseplanninghelp.com/join. It includes a video so that I can walk you around the hub so you can see exactly what it is that you're getting. And the other thing is that it's an evolving beast, that we will change it. We just want to make it better and streamline it, even if that sometimes means taking things out and just honing it a little bit more. Next time, Andrew Collinson is my guest as we look at the role of a structural engineer. What's that all about? Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.